Black CEO
You think you can just walk in
slapped
here
at a gala
after everything?
moments later,
You're
she
done.
walks away
Get
and
out.
kills
Get
a
out of here right
$1
now.
B deal.
Look, I know it's not
Hello,
perfect,
everyone.
but we have
Before
to go
begin
now.
today's video, I need
I'm not
your
going
help.
anywhere with you.
We've noticed that the channel is losing traction,
Filming all
and
my twins' times.
subscribing is one of the
Please,
best
please,
ways
please
you can
wait.
help us.
I
It's
have
quick,
right.
free, and allows us
You
to
don't have to do this,
continue
please listen
bringing
to me.
you great content.
You shouldn't
Your
be here.
support
I know.
means everything.
Then leave.
Let's keep
I
this
can't.
channel growing collectively.
You shouldn't have come.
Where are you watching from?
I
Drop
had
your
to.
city or country in the comments below.
Stop. It's over.
Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. No one heard the slap, but everyone felt it. The sound itself was swallowed by the chandelier's crystal upon crystal trembling faintly above a room dressed in silk diamonds and old money restraint. What lingered wasn't noise,
It was the pause that followed.
the kind of pause that rearranges power.
She stood at the center of it.
A black woman in a black evening gown cut clean at the shoulders, the fabric catching the light just enough to remind the room she belonged there. Her posture didn't bend. Her breath didn't rush. Only a thin red mark bloomed along her cheekbone, fresh, unmistakable, undeniable. Across from her, a man's hand hovered, midair, fingers still spread, as if they hadn't yet realized what they'd done. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh, my God." No one moved. The orchestra at the far end of the ballroom faltered. A violinist missed a note. A server froze with a silver tray tilted slightly forward, champagne trembling but unspilled. This was supposed to be a gala, an evening of smiles, rehearsed in mirrors of quiet deals signed behind polite laughter. But the room had shifted.
She did not turn around.
Not immediately. Behind her, faces blurred into a single expression, shock tangled with discomfort. Men in tailored tuxedos stared too long, then looked away. Women clutched pearls, hands rising instinctively to their throats as if proximity alone might stain them. A child near the edge of the crowd looked up at his mother, confused by the sudden stillness adults never explain. The man who had struck her cleared his throat. "This was a misunderstanding," he said, too quickly. The word hung in the air, thin and brittle. Misunderstanding. As if violence could be softened by vocabulary. As if the room might nod along and reset itself. She remained still. Her silence wasn't shock. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. She had learned long ago that moments like this were tests. Not of patience, but of posture. Of whether you flinch when the world expects you to fold. A woman near the bar murmured she must said something. Another voice followed, quieter but sharper. "This isn't the place for scenes." Scenes. As if dignity were a disturbance. The man took half a step back now, palms open, performing regret without offering it. He was used to rooms like this bending toward him. Used to consequences arriving later, if at all. Still, no one intervened. Security watched from a distance, waiting for a signal that hadn't come. Event staff exchanged glances, trained to see everything and acknowledge nothing. The silence thickened, not empty, but charged. Like a held breath before glass breaks. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned. Not toward him. Toward the room. Her eyes moved across the crowd, not searching, measuring. Faces fell away under her gaze. She wasn't asking for permission. She was taking inventory. That was when the weight of it landed. This wasn't about a slap. This was about what the room assumed would happen next. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to Amara Cole. Amara's jaw tightened once, barely perceptible. The mark on her cheek burned not with pain but with memory. Other rooms, other moments. Other times she'd been told without words that her presence was conditional. She reached up not to cover the mark, but to smooth a loose strand of hair back into place. The gesture was small, controlled, intentional. Across the room, someone finally whispered the question that mattered. "Do they know who she is?" Amara didn't answer. She didn't need to. The gala had already stopped being a celebration. It had become A reckoning. Amara Cole had learned over years in rooms like this that people often mistook stillness for softness. They saw the gown before they saw the spine beneath it. Black silk understated, no visible designer name stitched anywhere obvious. No diamonds at her throat. No entourage hovering close enough to announce importance. To them, she looked elegant but not untouchable. That assumption was the first mistake. She had chosen the dress deliberately. Not to blend in, but to remove distractions. Wealth announced itself too loudly in rooms like this. Power didn't need to. Power waited. Her shoulders remained square as the murmurs spread slow and poisonous, moving the way gossip always did, carefully at first, then with confidence. "She's so calm," someone whispered as if calm were suspicious. "I would have lost it another," replied half impressed, half unsettled. Amara heard none of it directly. She didn't need to. She'd learned to read rooms the way traders read markets, by watching what shifted when pressure entered. Who leaned forward? Who leaned away? Who pretended not to look? Across the ballroom, the man who had struck her straightened his cufflinks, already rehearsing the version of the story that would survive the night. His face had settled into something close to irritation. Not guilt. Never guilt. Men like him didn't feel that in public. Amara noticed something else instead. The way the room didn't rush to protect him. That was new. Years ago, at another gala in another city, a smaller insult had been enough to send her quietly toward the exit. No apology. No witnesses willing to remember it clearly the next day. Just polite smiles and the suggestion that perhaps she'd misunderstood the tone. She hadn't misunderstood then, and she wasn't misunderstanding now. A waiter approached, then stopped himself 2 steps short, unsure whether offering a drink would be interpreted as comfort or contamination. Amara met his eyes briefly and shook her head once. He exhaled in relief and retreated. Her hands rested at her sides, steady. No tremor. No clenched fists. This wasn't restraint. It was familiarity. People assumed first-time pain caused reaction. They didn't understand what repetition did. Repetition taught control. Near the edge of the crowd, a woman in a navy dress whispered to her companion, "Who is she?" The answer didn't come quickly. Names Amara knew were currency, and tonight hers hadn't been spent yet. She scanned the exits not to leave, but to note who was watching them. Security remained in place, alert but cautious. They were waiting for instruction from someone higher up the invisible ladder. That hesitation told her everything. Good. The red mark on her cheek had begun to darken. Cameras hadn't appeared yet, but they would. Phones always came out eventually once people sensed permission. Amara lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, but in alignment, bringing her posture back to center. She had walked into boardrooms with worse odds than this. She had negotiated deals while being underestimated by men who later asked for favors. This room thought it was witnessing the aftermath of a mistake. It wasn't. It was witnessing the opening position of a negotiation they didn't know they were part of. Somewhere behind her, a voice finally asked louder this time, "Shouldn't someone do something?" Amara allowed herself the smallest pause before answering, just long enough for the question to echo unanswered. Yes, she thought. Someone already had. The silence didn't last. It never did. It fractured first in whispers, then in glances sharpened by judgment. The kind of glances people believed were invisible. The kind they used when they thought consequence was elsewhere. She must have crossed a line, a man muttered near the bar, his voice low but certain. People don't just react like that for no reason, another replied, nodding as if logic had been satisfied. Assumption moved faster than truth. Amara felt it settle over the room like a second chandelier, heavy, unspoken, suspended above everyone's heads. The narrative was forming without her participation, built from familiar pieces, provocation, misunderstanding, discomfort, reframed as justification. She had seen this pattern before. Many times. A woman in heels leaned toward her friend and whispered, "This is why they shouldn't invite outsiders to these events." The word landed wrong, but comfortably so. Outsiders. as if wealth erased history, as if presence needed endorsement. Amara remained where she was. Across the ballroom, the man who had struck her had found his footing again. He laughed softly now, the sound meant to reassure those around him. A practiced laugh. Signal. It's being handled, he said, not to her, but to the room. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be.
Handled meant contained.
Controlled. Forgotten. Two men beside him nodded, relieved.
Someone clapped lightly prematurely, as if closing a scene.
The orchestra resumed, cautious at first, notes creeping back into the air like nothing had happened. That was the moment Amara recognized the danger not in him, but in them. The room wanted to move on. Security shifted subtly, their attention dividing. Not toward her. Toward optics. Toward restoring atmosphere. One guard spoke quietly into his earpiece, eyes never leaving the crowd. Another glanced at Amara, then away, waiting for instruction that would protect the event, not the person. She felt the weight of it, then not the insult, but the expectation. Leave gracefully. Don't ruin the night. Preserve comfort. A familiar offer surfaced, unspoken but clear. Amara exhaled through her nose, slow and measured. This was the part people misunderstood. They believed restraint was compliance. That patience meant surrender. It didn't. It meant timing. Near the back of the room, a younger woman, early 30s, judging by posture and uncertainty, stood rigid, her clutch forgotten at her side. Her eyes hadn't left Amara since the moment of impact. She didn't whisper, didn't smile, didn't look away. That mattered. The red mark on Amara's cheek drew stares now no longer avoidable. Someone reached for a phone, hesitated, then lowered it again. Permission hadn't been granted yet. Not officially. The man cleared his throat once more, louder this time. "If you'll excuse us," he said, turning slightly as if to guide Amara aside. "Not touching her. Not yet." The implication was enough. Amara turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. The laughter in his expression faltered. For the first time, the room noticed what she was not doing. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't leaving. The music thinned again. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Attention spread, not explosive, but tightening, like a room realizing it had misjudged the weight of what it was carrying. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice, female-controlled, unfamiliar, said quietly, but clearly this doesn't look handled. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room shifted. And for the first time that night, the story paused, waiting to see who would speak next. His name was Grant Whitmore. It carried weight in rooms like this, stitched into donor lists, etched onto plaques no one read but everyone respected. He was introduced with phrases like longtime supporter and key benefactor, the kind of man whose presence alone reassured organizers that the evening would end profitably. Grant had learned early that money softened memory. He stood straighter now, sensing the room hesitate, but assuming, as always, that hesitation would bend toward him. His jaw set in irritation rather than remorse. To him, the moment had already passed. It simply hadn't realized it yet. "I said it was a misunderstanding," he repeated louder, projecting calm the way men like him projected authority. "Let's all take a breath." A few people nodded reflexively. Others exhaled, grateful for permission to stop feeling uncomfortable. Discomfort was expensive in social currency. It demanded choices. Grant turned slightly, positioning himself so Amara was no longer directly in front of him, but offset, placed rather than confronted. It was a subtle maneuver practiced over decades of boardrooms and closed-door negotiations. "This is a private event," he added, voice smooth. "No need to escalate." Escalate meant expose. Amara watched him with detached clarity. She recognized the strategy because she had negotiated against it before. Frame the moment as procedural. Reduce harm to tone. Convert violence into inconvenience. He hadn't asked if she was all right. He hadn't apologized. That omission told her everything. Grant's gaze flicked briefly to the security staff, then back to the crowd. He wasn't asking them to act. He was reminding them who he was. The reminder worked on a few. They straightened, subtly realigning their loyalty toward the familiar gravity of his influence. He smiled, then thin, controlled. "We're all adults here." The phrase landed wrong. A child nearby shifted closer to his mother, instinctively sensing the shift in air. Adults, Amara thought, were often the worst witnesses. They knew too well what staying silent cost and what speaking up threatened. Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice, careful to appear conciliatory. "You don't want this to define the night," he said, eyes never softening. "These things have a way of sticking." A warning disguised as concern. He believed the room would agree with him, and for a moment it seemed like it might. The orchestra waited. Servers hovered, trapped between duty and avoidance. Conversations resumed in fragments, the way people talked when trying to pretend a crack in the ceiling wasn't spreading. Grant adjusted his jacket, already moving toward closure. "I'll have someone see you out," he offered casually, as if arranging transportation after dessert. That was the line. Not the slap.
Not the justification.
The assumption of exit. Amara felt it settle into place, the confirmation she'd been waiting for. He didn't see her as a person who might stay, only as a problem to be relocated. She met his eyes again, steady and unblinking. For the first time, something in his expression shifted, not fear but confusion. He had miscalculated the speed of the room. The silence had lasted longer than it should have. The deference was thinner than he expected. Behind him, a man whispered Grant, "Maybe," then stopped. Grant lifted a hand, dismissing the interruption without turning. "It's handled," he said again, but the word didn't land the same way twice. The room no longer leaned toward him. It hovered, waiting. And Grant Whitmore, for all his certainty, had just made the mistake of assuming the night still belonged to him. Amara didn't move, but her mind did. It slipped quietly and without permission into a room that no longer existed except in the way certain moments never really ended. A hotel lobby years ago.
Smaller.
Less forgiving. She'd been younger then, her confidence still learning how to sit in her body without apology. She remembered the way the front desk clerk had smiled too tightly before asking if she was lost. The way his eyes flicked to her shoes, then to the empty space beside her where an assistant or a husband was apparently expected to stand. She remembered producing her reservation, watching him reread her name as if it might rearrange itself into something more acceptable. It hadn't. "Let me check with my manager," he'd said. And then she waited. Long enough to understand she was being tested. Long enough to learn what patience cost when it was mistaken for permission. That night, she'd left quietly. Not because she believed him, but because she believed in timing. Timing had built her life. The memory didn't sting anymore. It instructed. Back in the ballroom, the music faltered again, as if the room itself were remembering something uncomfortable. Amara's breathing remained slow even. She let the recollection pass without resistance. This wasn't weakness surfacing. It was context. Grant's voice drifted toward her again, layered now with irritation. "There's no need to stand there," he said, gesturing vaguely. "We can step aside." Step aside had always been the phrase. Polite. Efficient. Erasing. Amara studied the faces nearest her.
Some were familiar.
Not by name, but by type. People who had benefited from her decisions without knowing they were hers. People who had applauded initiatives she'd funded while never bothering to learn who signed the checks. They watched her now, measuring whether history was about to repeat itself. A flicker of something crossed her mind, then not anger, but clarity. She thought of the first boardroom where she'd been the only black woman at the table. The way a man had interrupted her mid-sentence only to repeat her point 10 minutes later and receive praise for it. She hadn't corrected him. She'd let the room reveal itself. Then she'd bought controlling interest 6 months later. She thought of the acquisition everyone said was too ambitious. Too risky. Too soon. She'd closed it anyway. Quietly. Relentlessly. This moment felt familiar in the same way. The assumption that she would adapt to the room. The expectation that discomfort would send her elsewhere. Repetition had taught her something important. There were moments when leaving preserved dignity, and moments when staying redefined it. The red mark on her cheek throbbed now, no longer fresh but present enough to draw attention. A woman near the edge of the crowd looked at it, then at Amara's face, and something like recognition passed between them. No words, just understanding. Amara straightened, not dramatically but decisively. A subtle recalibration. She wasn't bracing herself. She was anchoring. Grant took a breath, preparing to speak again, unaware that the narrative he was trying to steer had already slipped from his grasp. Amara didn't interrupt him. She didn't need to. The memory had done its work, and the room, whether it knew it yet or not, was standing on the edge of something it could no longer undo. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even loud. But it cut through the room with more precision than anything that had come before. I saw her name. The voice came from just beyond the outer ring of the crowd, female-controlled, unshaking. Not young enough to be dismissed as Na'vi. Not old enough to be written off as irrelevant. The kind of voice that belonged to someone used to meetings where silence carried consequence. Heads turned. The woman stepped forward half a pace no further. She didn't claim the center. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shifted the geometry of the room. I saw it on the list, she repeated. Before, tonight. Grant turned irritation flashing across his face before he smoothed it back into something tolerable. I'm sorry, who are you? The question was a weapon. It always had been. The woman met his gaze without flinching.
Someone who reads what I'm sent,
She replied. No title offered. No justification. Just fact. A murmur rippled outward, soft but unmistakable. The room recalibrated again, not dramatically but perceptibly. Doubt crept in where certainty had been rehearsed. Amara watched the exchange carefully. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She understood the power of the moment too well to claim it. Grant chuckled, once low and dismissive. Lists change, he said. Things get miscommunicated. Miscommunicated. Another word designed to erase edges. The woman didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said this didn't feel like miscommunication. That did it. The sentence landed where logic alone could not. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. And observations in rooms like this were dangerous. Someone near the bar lowered their glass. Another shifted closer as if proximity might grant clarity. A phone appeared briefly, then disappeared again. Still waiting. Grant's smile thinned. He looked around expecting alignment and found hesitation instead. The loyalty he counted on was no longer automatic. It was conditional now. Security straightened. One of them glanced, not at Grant, but at Amara. Just for a second. Long enough to register recalculation. The woman took a step back, her role complete. She hadn't declared allegiance. She hadn't taken a side. She had done something more disruptive. She had questioned the version of events being sold. Amara felt the room tilt not toward her, but away from inevitability. That was enough. Grant cleared his throat. We're not going to litigate this here, he said, voice tight. Let's keep perspective. Perspective. Another word meant to shrink what refused to be small. Amara finally moved. Not forward. Not away. She turned slightly, angling her body just enough to face the woman who had spoken. Their eyes met briefly, an exchange too quick to catalog, too clear to misread. Thank you, without saying it. I see you without debt. Then, Amara looked back at the room. The witness had done her part. Now the weight shifted fully onto Amara's shoulders, and the room, once so eager to move on, found itself waiting again. Not for permission, for what she would do next. Grant Whitmore smiled again. It was a reflex, polished automatic, sharpened by years of never being the one asked to explain himself. The room had wavered, yes, but he could still feel the old gravity pulling things back into place. A witness didn't overturn hierarchy. Not here. Not like this. He glanced at Amara, then past her, addressing the space around her rather than the woman herself. Let's be honest, he said, voice light, almost indulgent. This has gotten out of hand. Out of hand? As if the problem were the reaction, not the act. He tilted his head slightly, lowering his tone into something meant to sound reasonable. You walk into rooms like this, he continued, and you have to understand how things work. A few people stiffened. Others leaned in, sensing the edge. Grant gestured vaguely, encompassing the chandeliers, the tuxedos, the donors' tables. This is a certain world, and people expect a standard. There it was. Amara felt it land, not as surprise, but as confirmation. Grant's eyes flicked to the mark on her cheek, then away again, dismissing it with practiced ease. No one meant to make you feel unwelcome, he said. But you can't just... He paused, searching for the word he thought wouldn't betray him. Disrupt things. Disrupt. Another word sharpened into a weapon. A woman near the orchestra inhaled sharply. The sound cut through the room like a warning bell. Someone else whispered, did he really just say that? Grant pressed on, emboldened by his own momentum. You have to know, he added, voice firmer now, that not every space is meant for. He stopped himself. Too late. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was electric. Every head turned toward Amara, not to see how she would react, but to see if she would finally break. This was the line. Not because it was loud, not because it was explicit, but because it revealed what politeness had been hiding all night. Amara didn't respond immediately. She let the words hang unrescued. She felt the room recoil, not from her, but from him. Even those who had nodded earlier now avoided his gaze. The shift was subtle but irreversible. Grant sensed it too. His jaw tightened. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. You're taking this the wrong way. The oldest defense in the room. Amara lifted her chin just enough to meet his eyes squarely. Her voice, when it came, was calm. Not raised. Not sharp. You don't get to decide how it lands, she said. The sentence cut clean. No insult. No accusation. Just truth. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but something stopped him. The room had already moved past him. His words no longer led. They chased. The line had been crossed, and everyone in the ballroom knew it. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already leaning forward, waiting for something dramatic, for anger, for confrontation, for the kind of reaction that would let everyone choose a side and feel righteous about it. She gave them none of that. Instead, she reached into the small black clutch at her side and removed her phone. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, so ordinary it almost went unnoticed until it didn't. Grant watched her with visible impatience. There's no need to involve anyone else, he said quickly, sensing the shift before fully understanding it. We can resolve this privately. Privately meant quietly. Quietly meant safely. For him, Amara didn't look at him. Her thumb unlocked the screen with a single practiced motion. No hesitation. No second glance. She wasn't searching for a number. She already knew where this was going. The room grew still again, not because she demanded it, but because everyone felt the change in tempo. This wasn't escalation. It was procedure. She lifted the phone to her ear. Now, she said, one word, measured, certain. That was all. Grant frowned. Who are you calling? He asked, a trace of irritation leaking through his control. This is unnecessary. Amara remained silent, listening. Across the ballroom, a man near the sponsors' table stiffened, recognizing the posture. A woman 2 rows back straightened unconsciously, as if remembering meetings that ended careers without ever raising voices. This wasn't a call for help. It was a trigger. Grant laughed too loudly. "You're making this into something it doesn't need to be," he said, glancing around for agreement that didn't arrive. "Let's not embarrass anyone." Embarrassment was the wrong word. What was coming didn't care about dignity. It cared about records. Amara lowered the phone slightly, just enough to speak. "Activate the contingency," she said calmly. A pause. Then from the other end, a voice responded, quiet, professional, immediate. "Confirmed." The word traveled faster than sound. Grant blinked. What contingency? He demanded, the question sharp, now no longer amused. Amara finally looked at him. "You don't need to know," she said. "Not yet." The certainty in her tone unsettled him more than anger ever could. This wasn't defiance. It was alignment of people, systems, and timing he hadn't accounted for.
Security shifted again.
This time without being prompted. One of them checked his earpiece. Another adjusted his stance, eyes moving not toward Amara, but toward Grant. The room felt it. Something had been set in motion that couldn't be walked back with smiles or money. Amara slipped the phone back into her clutch. She hadn't made a scene. She had started a process. And processes, unlike apologies, did not care who you were. The room waited. Not politely. Not comfortably. It waited the way a jury waits when it already knows the verdict, but needs to hear it spoken. Grant Whitmore felt it before he understood it. The subtle shift of attention away from him. The way conversations had stopped pretending to resume. The way security no longer looked past Amara, but through him. "You're overplaying this," he said, the words sharp, now stripped of their earlier charm. "Whatever you think you're doing," Amara raised a hand. Not high. Not dramatic. Just enough. He stopped. That alone unsettled the room. She stepped forward one pace. The sound of her heels against marble was soft, but it landed with precision. Every eye followed her now, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. She didn't rush. She let the silence tighten. Then she spoke. "You keep saying this was a misunderstanding," Amara said evenly. "That I disrupted your evening. Your space." Her gaze held Grant's without blinking. "Let me be clear." The pause that followed wasn't theatrical. It was surgical. "You didn't strike a guest." The room leaned in. "You struck the majority shareholder?" The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The kind of stillness that arrives when reality recalibrates faster than emotion can keep up. Then the room broke. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the bar. A glass clinked against marble and shattered. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," not in disbelief but recognition. Grant's face drained of color. "That's not," he started, then stopped as if the sentence had nowhere safe to land. His eyes darted, searching for confirmation, for contradiction, for anyone to correct her. No one did. Amara continued, her voice unchanged. "You didn't slap a woman who wandered into the wrong room," she said. "You assaulted a principal investor. In a public venue. With witnesses." Each phrase closed another door. Phones came out now. No hesitation. No asking permission. Screens glowed like quiet verdicts being recorded in real time. Grant took a step back. Just one. Enough to give him space from the truth pressing in. "This is outrageous," he said weakly. "You can't just say I didn't just say it," Amara replied. "I documented it." A ripple moved through the security team. One of them spoke softly into his earpiece. Another nodded once, listening. The orchestra packed up their instruments. No one told them to. They understood. Amara turned her gaze outward, addressing the room at large. "I stayed silent," she said, "because silence reveals more than noise ever could. And tonight it revealed exactly who thought they were untouchable." She looked back at Grant. "You were wrong." The word landed with finality. The reveal wasn't the power. The power was what happened next. And Grant Whitmore, who had built his life on rooms bending in his favor, now stood in one that no longer belonged to him. Power never collapses loudly. It slips. It drains from a room the way heat does when the doors open in winter, quietly at first, then all at once. The change wasn't announced. No one stood to declare it, but everyone felt it. Grant Whitmore did first. He stood frozen mouth, slightly open eyes, darting from face to face, searching for the reflexive loyalty that had always arrived on cue. It didn't. People avoided his gaze now, suddenly fascinated by the floor, by their phones, by anything that didn't ask them to choose sides out loud.
Security moved.
Not toward Amara. Toward him. One guard stepped closer, posture respectful but firm. Another spoke softly into his earpiece, nodding as if confirming details that had just become undeniable. The choreography was subtle, trained to avoid spectacle but unmistakable to anyone who understood hierarchy. "Sir," the guard said low enough to preserve the illusion of dignity, "we need you to step aside." Grant blinked. "This is absurd," he snapped, but the edge in his voice rang hollow. "You can't seriously be doing this." The guard didn't argue. He didn't need to. Around them, the room rearranged itself. Conversation stopped fully now. Guests edged back, creating space as if proximity might implicate them. A woman who had laughed with Grant minutes earlier turned away, her expression suddenly careful, curated. Phones were everywhere, not raised in accusation, raised in documentation. Amara watched without expression. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. Grant tried once more, squaring his shoulders. "You're making a mistake," he said, but the words no longer carried weight. They landed flat, stripped of authority by the silence that followed.
Someone near the sponsors table whispered he's done.
And this time, no one corrected them. The guard gestured again, firmer now. Grant hesitated just long enough to mark the moment, then moved. His steps were controlled, but his composure fractured with each one. The room parted for him without ceremony. No applause. No boos. Just absence. As he was escorted toward the exit, Amara felt the final shift complete itself. The room exhaled not in relief, but in recognition. This was what consequence looked like when it didn't need to perform. She turned away before the doors closed behind him. There was nothing left to watch. The collapse was over. What remained was the standard. And the room now quieter than it had ever been understood, it had just been raised. Amara didn't follow the movement toward the exit. She didn't need to see Grant Whitmore leave to know that he had. His absence was already louder than his presence had ever been. The room no longer bent around him. It had reoriented itself quietly, instinctively around something else. Around her. She stood where she was centered, composed, the mark on her cheek still visible but no longer defining the moment. It had become evidence, not injury. The room waited again. Not tensely this time. Respectfully. This was unfamiliar territory for many of them. They were used to power announcing itself with noise-raised voices, dramatic gestures, public dominance. What they were witnessing now unsettled them more. Amara spoke without stepping forward. "I want to be clear about something," she said, her voice level, carrying without effort. This wasn't about anger. She let the words settle. It wasn't about humiliation. And it certainly wasn't about revenge. A few people shifted, uncomfortable with how precisely she named what they had expected. "This was about standards," Amara continued, "about what behavior gets excused when no one believes it will be challenged." Her eyes moved slowly across the room, not accusing, not forgiving. Observing. For years, rooms like this have relied on silence to protect reputation, on discomfort to keep order. She paused. Tonight, that system failed. No one interrupted. No one dared. Amara lifted her chin slightly, not in pride, but in alignment with something internal unshaken. "I didn't raise my voice," she said. "I raised the standard." The sentence landed cleanly. No echo. No embellishment. She reached for her clutch again, this time not to initiate anything but to conclude it. The motion signaled finality more effectively than any announcement could have. I trust the rest will be handled accordingly, she added, already turning away. Handled now meant something different. As Amara moved through the room, people parted without being asked. Not hurriedly. Not fearfully. With recognition. Some lowered their eyes. Others met hers, briefly offering nods they hadn't known they would need to give.
She didn't slow for them.
She didn't rush either. At the threshold, she paused not for effect, but because moments like this deserve to be marked internally. Then she stepped forward and disappeared into the corridor beyond the ballroom lights. Behind her, the gala remained. But it would never be remembered for its music or its donors or its speeches. It would be remembered for the night silence failed and dignity didn't. The doors closed without sound. Inside the ballroom, no one spoke at first. Not because they were told to stay quiet, but because something had settled into place heavy and undeniable. The gala continued technically. Music resumed. Glasses were refilled. But the night had split cleanly in two before and after. People stood differently now. Conversations changed tone. Laughter came slower, measured, as if everyone were suddenly aware of how thin the walls really were. A few guests checked their phones, already seeing headlines form in real time. Others stared into space, replaying moments they hadn't questioned before. Some would remember this night with discomfort. Others would remember it as instruction. Outside, Amara Cole moved through the corridor alone. The cool air against her skin felt grounding, not relieving. She touched her cheek once, not to check the mark, but to acknowledge it. A reminder not of harm, but of clarity. By morning, contracts would be reviewed. Invitations reconsidered. Explanations drafted. Systems adjusted quietly the way systems always did when they realized they'd been exposed. No statement would capture what really happened, because justice didn't arrive with sirens that night. It arrived standing still, and the world slowly, reluctantly learned how to move around it.